She called me a joke, laughed at my dress, mocked my online degree in front of 100 executives. But just minutes later, the man she was desperately trying to impress, her boss, walked in, wrapped his arm around me, and said, "Beloved wife, stick around, because what happened next didn't just expose her. It revealed the truth my entire family had been hiding for years." My name is Alyssa Reed, and I wasn't always the woman people clapped for. 3 months ago, at the Ravencore Summit, the kind of event where egos arrived before the limos, a moment changed everything. Not because of applause, not because of some breakout session I crushed, but because of a single sentence from a man who shouldn't have known me, wrapping his arm around my waist and calling me his beloved wife. But let me take you back to the beginning. The lobby of Ravencore was marble and mirrors, built less for function and more to intimidate. Everything shimmered: steel beams, manicured plants, even the security guards' name tags. It was a place that screamed, "You don't belong here," unless you had the right shoes and the right last name. I had neither. I wore a clearance rack navy dress from a local boutique, paired with heels that clicked louder than I liked. I chose them for that exact reason. They reminded me I was present, that I wasn't fading into the carpet. My sister, Vivian Reed, spotted me before I saw her. She stood surrounded by two men in gray suits, her hand elegantly resting on one's arm, smiling with a kind of polish only years of boarding schools and executive grooming could provide. Her smile didn't falter when she saw me. That was her art, humiliation wrapped in honey. "Well," she said, sauntering over with that familiar tilt of her chin, "did you roll off a clearance rack? Or is this that accessible fashion trend you were obsessed with in college?" I blinked. Her insults didn't sting like they used to, but they still landed, because she knew where to aim. "No name tag," she added, eyes scanning my chest. "You're either early or not supposed to be here." I didn't answer, just clutched my purse tighter and stepped toward the elevator. She followed with a smirk. "Still telling people your online certification is a real degree?" I didn't flinch, didn't argue, because that's what she wanted. And I didn't come to fight. I came to watch. Upstairs, the summit welcome was already in motion. Rows of chairs, oversized digital displays, and buzzwords plastered across every wall. Innovation, transparency, leadership. No one greeted me. No one even looked up. I took a seat in the back, the kind with no nameplate, no reserved sign, just an empty chair near a flickering projector. Vivian entered moments later, flanked by her department. She was textbook executive, navy silk blouse, tailored pencil skirt, and heels that looked like they cost more than my rent. She didn't acknowledge me, not even a nod. "Let's get started," she said. "We've got a full agenda." A junior manager mistook me for catering halfway through the intros, whispered if I had refills. When I shook my head, he shrugged and walked off. Vivian didn't correct him. She was too busy laughing at someone's recycled joke about AI ethics. And still, I stayed. Took notes. Listened. I watched her not as my sister, but as a case study. She wore power like perfume. Manufactured. Strong. Distracting. My thoughts drifted to being 16, showing Vivian my first app interface. She had said it was cute, like glitter on a calculator. To being 24, submitting a proposal on ethical risk matrices to a nonprofit. Weeks later, their accepted pitch looked eerily like mine, but credited to someone else. I remembered all of it, not out of spite, out of clarity. When they passed around briefing folders, mine contained something familiar, a visual framework. It was my design, an early draft I'd built 6 months ago for a client that never finalized. No credit, no name, but it was mine. I knew every line of that architecture, like my own skin. I didn't say a word, just creased the corner. As the meeting adjourned, Vivian brushed past. "You should network," she said, tone bright. "Smile more. You'll look less misplaced." It wasn't advice. It was a warning. On the rooftop, where the summit mixer buzzed with laughter and clinking glasses, I stood on the margins. No one offered me a name badge. A staffer asked if I was with waitstaff. I nodded to avoid the conversation. Vivian spotted me again. "Alyssa," she called across the deck, voice dipped in performance. "Come here. I want to introduce you." I walked over slowly. She wrapped an arm around my shoulder, lightly, like I was a prop, and turned to a small group. "This is my sister. She's been dabbling in AI, TikTok tutorials, and whatnot. Still deciding between YouTube or Udemy as her alma mater." They laughed. The consultant from Boston tried to soften the blow. "Hey, some of my best devs learned from Reddit threads." I smiled politely, said nothing, but inside, something shifted. I wasn't angry. I was ready. By the time the summit wrapped, I hadn't handed out a single business card. But I'd collected something more valuable. Names. Glances. Moments. Evidence. And then, just as the crowd thinned and the sun dipped past the skyline, he arrived. Cash and win. Visionary. Vivian's boss. The man she had spent all week trying to impress. He walked up to me. "No hesitation. No confusion." Wrapped an arm around my waist, and said, "There you are, beloved wife. I've been looking all over for you." Every head turned, Vivian's included. And just like that, everything she thought she knew about my place in this world began to unravel. But how we got there, that's the story. And it's only just beginning. The dinner that followed the summit's first day was held at a boutique hotel just 2 blocks from Ravencore's headquarters. It had all the usual trappings of exclusivity: dimmed chandeliers, waiters in black vests, and wine labels so obscure only a sommelier could pronounce them correctly. I arrived a few minutes early, not out of eagerness, but out of necessity. I needed to understand the layout, the flow, where I might sit to both observe and remain unseen. I chose a table at the edge of the room, near the wall where an abstract painting hung, a chaotic storm of grays and reds, not unlike the tension running under my skin. Most people hadn't arrived yet, but I could already hear the tone being set: calculated laughs, strategic greetings, the hum of anticipation from people who knew how to climb. Vivian swept in just before the keynote speaker. She looked stunning, of course, clad in black with metallic accents, a vision of ambition. She didn't acknowledge me, didn't even glance my way. But her performance began the moment she walked through the door. Air kisses, firm handshakes, that executive poise she wore better than jewelry. Dinner unfolded like a networking playbook. Introductions disguised as compliments, stories polished for impact, forks clinking against fine china. I kept my hands in my lap, occasionally lifting my water glass. I wasn't there to eat. When the dessert plates arrived, the room dimmed slightly for toasts. A man I didn't recognize, some VP in marketing, stood and raised his glass. "To innovation," he said. "And to those who make it happen." Vivian seized the moment. She stood, smiling as if she'd rehearsed this. "To my sister, Alyssa," she said, gesturing in my direction, her voice syrupy sweet. "Whose timing and good looks keep surprising us all." Laughter. The kind that echoed just long enough to sting. I didn't raise my glass. I didn't blink. I stared straight ahead into the untouched slice of tiramisu on my plate. I could feel eyes on me. Curious, confused, but mostly disinterested. I wasn't a threat. Yet. There's a shift that happens when you stop absorbing disrespect and start repurposing it. Every time someone laughed at me, dismissed me, underestimated me, it added to the scaffolding I was building inside. A quiet structure no one could see, but one I knew would one day hold the weight of something greater. Later that night, after most guests had filtered out, I lingered in the courtyard outside. The air was cool, scented with lavender and the faint buzz of city traffic. I stared at my phone, debating whether to send the email I had drafted 2 hours earlier. Subject: Slide 14 to Vivian Reed. Vivian. The logic sequence used in Slide 14 today is based on architecture I designed 6 months ago. I have the original repository with timestamped commits and correspondence. Let's handle this cleanly before legal or leadership needs to get involved. You know where to find me. Alyssa. No smiley face. No passive-aggressive pleasantries. Just the truth, finally spoken. I hit send. No reply. But the system marked it red. That was enough. The next morning, I tried to log into the client dashboard I had access to from a side contract. Credentials failed. Tried again. Failed. I called the help desk. A woman named Zoria answered. Young voice, probably new. Hi, this is Alyssa Reed. I was a freelance consultant for the ethics compliance module last quarter. I'm supposed to have access through end of Q2. Pause. Typing. Your name isn't on the active list, she said. And there's a note here that your clearance was flagged for review? Flagged. The digital version of being locked out of your own house. That afternoon, I found out why. Someone forwarded me a Slack screenshot. Internal chat. Vivian to another strategy lead. If I don't block her now, it'll be too late. The reply, you sure she's not just tagging along? Vivian again. She's playing innocent. But we both know what she's angling for. There it was. Not just sibling rivalry. Career sabotage. Professional interference. And it didn't scare me. It clarified everything. I wasn't the underdog she tolerated. I was the variable she feared. The one she couldn't control. The next 2 days of the summit unfolded like a chess game. Vivian kept making moves, cutting me out of breakout sessions, excluding my name from digital slides, publicly questioning the validity of non-traditional credentials. I let her, because I had receipts, emails, diagrams, code commits, and one more thing, trust. Cashin knew. Not everything, but enough. Enough to ask me to sit beside him at the final keynote. Enough to pull me aside and say, when this ends, we're going to talk about your role here. A real one. I nodded. Not with hope. With certainty. Because when someone spends years erasing you from the picture, the greatest revenge isn't yelling your name. It's signing it. At the bottom of the next blueprint. On the second morning of the summit, the Ravencore campus shimmered beneath a crisp, pale sun. People moved through the marble atrium with purpose. Lanyards swung over expensive fabrics. Conversations drifted between floors and escalators like orchestral preludes, corporate, rehearsed, and confident. I arrived early again. Not to beat the crowd, but to witness it assemble. I watched the names on badges. The way people shook hands, introduced themselves, glanced sideways when they thought no one noticed. I studied hierarchy as if it were choreography. Titles dictated posture. Salaries influenced smiles. I wasn't on the list. But I knew the steps. Today's agenda included team strategy sessions, breakouts, workshops, roundtables. Cashin had said I should choose any track I liked. So I picked the one labeled Risk and Integrity in Scalable Systems. Irony was never lost on me. The room was rectangular, cold in design. Silver chairs in clean rows, polished table at the front, and 3 men with last names used like brands standing in a tight triangle, preparing. One of them, Martin, I remembered, had emailed me last quarter asking to borrow a framework I'd published online under a pseudonym. I declined. Politely. He looked at me now without recognition. Good. I sat near the back, where I always had the best angle. Vivian entered 5 minutes late. Not rushed. Deliberate. She wore navy blue today, the color of trust. A subtle signal. She greeted Martin first, then the others, her voice sliding easily into strategic familiarity. She didn't look at me. But I felt her notice. I kept my face blank. They began. The men opened with case studies. Vivian stepped in with an anecdote. A consulting win in Brazil. A cautionary tale from a healthcare startup. A mention of a new ethics module prototype in testing. My prototype. But she never said my name. I took notes. Not because I needed them, but because people underestimate those who write things down. Halfway through, an audience member raised a question. Something about system integrity during mergers. Martin started to answer, then stopped. Cashin had entered. Quietly. No entourage. He stood just inside the doorway, hands in his pockets. Gaze sweeping the room. Eyes followed him. Vivian straightened slightly. The air shifted. And then he did something unexpected. He walked to the back.
To me.
And he sat down. Right beside me. A few heads turned. I didn't move. Neither did he. He leaned slightly. They're building towers on your blueprints. I looked at him. They always do. No atreviushchin. I raised an eyebrow. Doesn't seem like it. He nodded. We'll fix that. That was all. No performance. No gesture. But the room had already noticed. When Vivian resumed speaking, her voice cracked, not a stumble, but a moment. Enough to hear it. Later, as we exited, Cashin said aloud, Alyssa, I want you to meet my lead for ethics integration. Heads turned. Vivian stopped. I extended a hand toward one of the strategy consultants nearby. Nice to meet you, I said. The consultant blinked. He shook my hand, hesitated. Didn't realize you were? Wait. Are you the one who wrote the compliance scaffolding memo? Vivian tried to recover. We all contributed to that. Cashin turned to her.
Yes.
But the original structure came from Alyssa. She's been consulting longer than most of us have had our titles. The silence that followed was clean. Cold. Like steel. Vivian smiled. The kind of smile that cut only inward. In the hallway after, a junior developer approached me timidly. Hey, I just wanted to say, I've been following your blog. The one with the anonymous design breakdowns? You helped me pass my ethics cert. I looked at her. She couldn't have been more than 25. Nervous. Sincere. Thank you, I said. I'm glad it helped. That moment stayed with me. Longer than Cashin's quiet vindication. Longer than Vivian's tight-lipped frustration. Because it reminded me that visibility wasn't about the stage. It was about resonance. And I was done whispering. When the next session began, I walked to the front of the room, not to take the mic, to take my seat, next to Cashin. The nameplate read Ethics and Strategy Advisor. It wasn't a courtesy. It was earned. And this time, they said my name out loud. By the time the lunch bell rang on the second day, the summit was starting to feel less like an event and more like a proving ground. People no longer simply walked through the halls. They moved with sharper purpose, like soldiers aligning for a parade they didn't want to miss. And somehow, I had become part of the terrain they measured against. Cashin's public acknowledgement earlier that morning had done more than validate my contribution. It had shifted the dynamic. I noticed it immediately. The way people looked at me had changed. No longer squinting as if trying to remember where they'd seen me before. Now they paused, trying to match what they'd heard with the quiet presence I had maintained. I wasn't on any official schedule, but people had started saving me seats. Consultants asked for my thoughts mid-discussion. A senior architect from the compliance team slid me a copy of a white paper draft and whispered, "Would love your feedback, off the record." I wasn't naive. This wasn't friendship. It was currency. Recognition is its own economy, and I was watching the value of my name appreciate in real time. After lunch, I wandered into a panel titled Moral Infrastructure, Building with Bias in Mind. A mouthful, but the kind of session I would have bookmarked months ago. This time, I didn't take a back seat. I slid into the second row. Vivian was on the panel.
Of course she was.
She sat between two researchers and a venture partner. Her smile was controlled, her notes printed on thick cardstock. The panel moderator gave her a warm introduction, full of inflated language that made it sound like she had invented digital ethics. Vivian Monroe, he said, has been instrumental in shaping Ravencore's reputation for responsible innovation. The applause was soft but respectful. She looked out at the crowd, scanning. Her gaze met mine for half a second. She didn't flinch. The session began. It was fine. Safe. Buzzwords without teeth. Until the moderator said, "I'd love to open the floor to comments from anyone with field experience." A pause. Then a woman in the front row turned around. Her badge read, VP, Data Compliance, West Division. "I think Alyssa Monroe might have some insight here," she said casually. "I heard she designed the core model behind our integrity checkpoints." Heads turned. Mine included. The moderator hesitated. Alyssa? I stood slowly. My voice, when it came, didn't need volume. It had weight. I appreciate the mention. I just want to point out, when we talk about bias in infrastructure, we often forget that erasure is also a bias. When voices are excluded, when contributions are anonymized, that becomes part of the architecture too. Not everything unethical is intentional, but it's still structural. Vivian shifted slightly in her seat. Not enough for anyone else to notice. But I saw it. A few people clapped. Softly. But the kind of applause that signals thought, not reflex. I sat down. The panel continued. But the air had shifted again. Later that afternoon, I found myself in the mezzanine lounge with a small group of junior analysts. One of them, Nia, leaned forward and whispered, "Is it true you ghost-wrote parts of the compliance roadmap last year?" I didn't answer directly. "I've contributed ideas," I said. "Not always under my name." She nodded solemnly. It matters to see someone like you not stay quiet. That stayed with me. I went to the restroom to breathe. Not because I was overwhelmed, but because I needed to regroup. Inside, the fluorescent lights were too bright. I stared at myself in the mirror. Still the same blazer. Same worn heels. But the woman looking back was no longer trying to disappear. Outside, as I stepped back into the corridor, I nearly collided with Vivian. "Oh," she said, catching herself. We both paused. She looked at me with something unreadable. Not anger. Not apology. "I suppose congratulations are in order," she said. Her tone was flat. I tilted my head. "For what?" She smiled tightly. "Making yourself unavoidable." I stepped back. Not out of deference, but distance. "I didn't make myself anything," I said. "You just got used to looking away." I left her standing there. That evening, I returned to my hotel room and opened my laptop. I drafted a short reflection. Visibility isn't an invitation. It's an interruption. And some legacies are rewritten not with noise, but with presence. I saved the file. It wasn't a story for now. It was a seed. Because momentum is a quiet kind of power. And mine was growing. The third day of the summit began with soft rain tapping the skylights above the atrium. Most guests arrived late, blaming traffic or hotel espresso machines. But I had been sitting in the corner of the cafeteria since 7:45 a.m., hands wrapped around a paper cup of black coffee. My inbox sat open on the tablet before me. Still no reply from Vivian. Not that I expected one. The email I sent the night before was succinct. Slide 14. My logic sequence. Timestamped proof. A firm yet professional tone. Nothing accusatory, but also no room to be ignored. And yet, ignored I was. A notification pinged at 8:13. Not from Vivian, but from the legal department. Meeting request, Alyssa Monroe Re. IP concern. I stared at it for a moment, letting the weight of it settle. Then I accepted. At 10 o'clock, I stepped into a sleek conference room with glass walls and no corners. Everything curved. Even the whiteboard. A woman in her early 50s, sharp eyes behind frameless glasses, greeted me with a nod. Marina Greaves, internal counsel. She didn't offer a handshake. Just motioned to a chair. "We've reviewed the materials you referenced in your message," she said, flipping open a folder. "You built this architecture 6 months ago?" I nodded. Under a freelance contract with the ethics team. Cashin signed the scope himself. Her eyes flicked to a note. That contract expired last quarter. I never waived authorship. "No, you didn't." A pause. Then she closed the folder slowly. "We won't be discussing this further with Vivian." Not directly. "Why not?" Marina removed her glasses. "Because this isn't about internal credit anymore. It's about liability. If this goes public, we'll need to disclose authorship. We'd rather do it on our terms." Meaning we're adjusting the documentation. Slide 14 will now reference A. Monroe, consultant. It wasn't an apology, but it was acknowledgement. My name. On the record. I walked out of the room with a strange hollowness pressing under my ribs. This should have felt like a win. But instead, it felt transactional. Recognition, yes. But on their terms. Without confrontation. Without consequence. I found Cashin in the lobby an hour later. Between meetings. You knew this was coming, I said. He didn't flinch. I did. And you let it happen. His eyes didn't shift. Sometimes letting it happen is the only way to show it for what it is. I hated that he was right. I hated that it had to be this way. That afternoon, I attended a breakout session titled Invisible Labor, the Engines Behind Innovation. Vivian wasn't there, but 3 of her junior staff were. I recognized them by the clipped confidence in their voices and the identical tablets they all carried. One of them spoke during the Q&A. We try to encourage recognition in our department. Credits are shared openly. It's part of the culture. I raised my hand. Do you audit that culture? He blinked. Pardon? Do you verify that shared credit actually includes the people who originated the work? A silence. Then a different voice answered. A young woman in the back row.
No.
But we should. After the session, she approached me. Her name was Jules. She wore a simple blazer and held her badge like it might burn her if it got too warm. I've read some of your work, she said. Quietly. It's passed around in threads and internal boards.
People reference it.
They just don't always say your name out loud. I smiled without showing teeth. That's the cost of invisible labor. You build the foundation, and someone else plants the flag.
Jules looked down.
How do you change that? I paused.
You speak.
Not just to be heard, but so the silence doesn't rewrite the story. She nodded slowly. Well, keep speaking. That night, I found a printed program slipped under my door. Tomorrow morning's keynote would now feature a guest segment. Designing ethics in real time, a fireside conversation. With me. No details. No prep call.
Just my name. Solo.
A statement. A spotlight. But not a trap. A challenge. I folded the paper and placed it beside my laptop. Then I opened my old project files, the ones with messy notes and timestamp versions. I reread everything I had written, every piece I had given freely, and I prepared. Because this time, the credit wasn't just mine. It was a record. And I was going to speak every part of it into permanence. The auditorium was darker than I expected. Not dim, not ominous, just dark enough to remind you that the spotlight was intentional. Rows of folding chairs stretched before me, filled with people adjusting their lanyards and flicking through their digital schedules. My name was on the program. Alone. No panel, no moderator. Just Alyssa Monroe, designing ethics in real time. I stood behind the curtain, one hand gripping the edges of my notes, though I already knew I wouldn't use them. My throat was dry, but not from fear. From clarity. Backstage, an assistant asked if I needed anything. Just water, I said. He returned seconds later with a bottle, his eyes wide. They're expecting something big, he said. No pressure. I smiled thinly. There's always pressure. The difference is who owns it. When I stepped on stage, the applause was polite. I didn't smile. Not yet. I stood there a moment, letting the weight of silence stretch just a breath longer than comfort allowed. Then I spoke. I wasn't supposed to be here. A few heads tilted. I wasn't invited to this stage. I was added. Quietly. Without introduction, without prep, without expectation. Which, ironically, makes me the most honest person on this platform today. Some chuckled. Others shifted uncomfortably. I held their eyes. Let's talk about ethics. Not the sanitized kind, not the ones in glossy onboarding modules or keynote buzzwords. Real ethics. The kind you practice when no one's watching, or worse, when everyone is. I clicked the first slide. My name appeared beside the AI module I had authored. There were murmurs. Some eyebrows rose. Vivian, sitting 3 rows from the front, blinked slowly, her mouth tight. This architecture, I continued, was developed during a freelance engagement. My name never made it to the version you've seen, but it was there. Always there. Another slide, timestamps, file names, commit logs. I'm not here for pity. I'm not here for revenge. I'm here because silence would mean I accepted the rewrite. And I don't. A hand in the back raised. I nodded. How do we protect ethics and systems when the people behind them are the ones erasing authorship? I paused. By making authorship undeniable. By documenting, archiving, speaking. You don't need to shout. You just need to leave a record. That seemed to land. I answered more questions. Spoke about algorithmic bias, the dangers of sanitized data, and the moral obligation to cite invisible labor. And slowly, the room leaned in, not out of politeness, but presence. Cashin entered near the end. He stood by the back wall, arms crossed. He didn't interrupt. He didn't nod. Just watched. I closed with this. Success, in its truest form, isn't applause. It's the ability to stand where you were never meant to stand and speak like you belong. Because you do. Even if they crop you out, you are still in the frame. The applause this time wasn't polite. It was present. I stepped off stage without looking at Vivian. I didn't need to. Outside, the light had changed. A storm had passed while I was speaking. Everything smelled like clean concrete and unsettled earth. A young man followed me out, clipboard in hand. That was, people will be quoting that line by tomorrow. I glanced at him. Which line? He hesitated. The one about being in the frame. I nodded. Good. Let them. Back at the networking lounge, people I'd never spoken to suddenly had room at their table. One VP asked if I was looking for permanent placement. Another offered coffee. Jules found me near the fruit tray.
That was something, she said.
I raised an eyebrow. Something?
Something permanent.
The words settled in me like warmth. That evening, I received a forwarded message. Cashin had sent my talk to the board. Subject line. Not a consultant. A standard. Attached was a screenshot of slide 14. With my name. Spelled right. The hours after the speech passed in a blur of handshakes and half-smiles. I couldn't walk more than 3 steps without someone asking for a minute of my time. Each introduction began with a variation of, I caught the end of your talk, or I heard what you did up there. But what they really meant was, I didn't know who you were before, but now I do. I should have felt triumphant. But instead, I felt heavy. Not defeated, just aware. Of the weight that comes with being seen after years of strategic invisibility. I stood at the glass wall of the mezzanine lounge, watching the rain streak down the windows. Somewhere in the city below, people moved through puddles, unaware of the shift that had taken place high above them. I sipped lukewarm coffee from a paper cup and tried to calm the low thrum of adrenaline still pulsing beneath my skin. Looks like the frame didn't hold. A voice said beside me. It was Leona, the strategy lead, who had once asked if I planned to cause trouble. Today, her voice lacked its usual sharpness. No, I replied. Turns out the frame was made of cheap glass. She chuckled, and then was quiet for a moment. There's going to be fallout. I know. Vivian's not one to go down quietly. I know that too. She turned to face me fully. Do you have a plan? I thought about the folder I had started building, the receipts, the timelines, the files. I thought about the ethics fellowship I was quietly sketching, about the junior developers and analysts who had begun to orbit me like satellites around a new gravity. Yes, I said, but it's not a plan for revenge. Leona nodded, seemingly satisfied. If you ever need allies, you know where my desk is. After she left, I stared at the rain a while longer. The summit would end tomorrow. By Monday, the conversations would shift, the applause would fade, and the politics would resume. But something irreversible had happened. I had been named. Back in my hotel room, I opened my laptop and reviewed the inbox again. A message from a research director at an ethics nonprofit blinked at the top. Would love to discuss a potential collaboration. Your framework aligns closely with ours. And your perspective is critical. Critical. Not impressive. Not bold. Not inspiring. Critical. It was the first time anyone had used that word to describe my ideas. I replied with a brief thank you and suggested a meeting the following week. Then I closed the laptop and stared at the ceiling for a while. Alyssa Monroe, former ghost, now reluctant centerpiece. But even centerpieces can choose how they're arranged. The next morning, I wore the same outfit I had worn on day one. Not out of necessity, but intention. Let them see I hadn't changed my costume just because they'd changed their tone. When I stepped into the final networking breakfast, heads turned. There was a brief, collective moment of recalibration. They expected elevation, sharper heels, a new blazer, something to signal I had arrived. But I wasn't there to perform ascension. I was there to finish. Cashin caught up with me near the buffet table. "Your talk made ripples," he said without preamble. "The board is attentive now." "Are they angry?" I asked. "They're interested. Which is worse?" We shared a small, knowing smile. Then he added, "I'm recommending a formal review of the ethics architecture, internally and with third-party oversight. You'll be invited. Not as a consultant. I hope." "No," he said. "As a stakeholder. A seat. Not next to Vivian. A seat on my own terms." Later that day, while waiting for the elevator, I bumped into Jules. She looked tired but pleased. "I've never seen that room so quiet," she said. "And I've been here 9 years." I shrugged. Maybe they were just being polite. She laughed. "You scare them. That's good. Means they're listening." The elevator arrived. As I stepped in, Jules called out, "Oh, and Alyssa?" I turned. "Keep making noise. It suits you." I didn't reply. The doors closed. Inside the elevator, I exhaled for what felt like the first time in 24 hours. I wasn't used to this kind of validation. This strange air of legitimacy. It still felt like borrowed clothing. But slowly, stitch by stitch, I was tailoring it into something that fit. The summit would end in a few hours. My speech would become a video clip, a highlight, a talking point. But I wasn't interested in being a headline. I was building something quieter, longer lasting, a record, a presence, a standard. And this time, I wasn't writing it in pencil. The Monday after the summit dawned quiet. Not anticlimactic, just careful. I arrived at the office early, before the clatter of keyboards and polite hallway greetings resumed their daily rhythm. On my desk was a single envelope with no markings. Inside, a signed approval form for the proposed review board and an invite to the first private strategy session. No message. No congratulations. Just authorization. It was more than I'd been given in years. I stared at it for a moment before tucking it into a new folder marked Now. By noon, I'd already received 6 meeting invites from departments that hadn't known my name a week ago. The tone of the emails had shifted. Less curt, more inquisitive. The subject lines said collaboration or feedback, but what they meant was, "We saw you on the stage. Now we want to know what you know." I accepted only 2. Vivian had not returned to the office that day. Rumors filled the break rooms in murmurs. Temporary leave, internal review, board intervention. But I didn't speculate. I documented. I listened. Because this time, I wasn't going to be caught off guard. The next few days moved like tectonic plates, slow, but irrevocable. My role wasn't defined yet, which meant I had the freedom to define it. I began setting up quiet one-on-ones with junior staff, ethics analysts, and legal interns. I asked questions no one had asked them before. What felt off in the process? Where were they silenced? Who was rewarded for silence? Their answers weren't explosive. They were granular. But that's where real architecture begins, in the load-bearing details. One afternoon, Leona stopped by my desk with 2 lattes in hand. "Got something for you," she said, placing one beside my keyboard. "It's from the old whistleblower archive. Thought you'd want to see it." Inside the file were internal memos, draft reports, and one redacted thread dated 2 years back. A complaint filed by a young programmer whose framework was later published under someone else's name. The whistleblower's initials? My initials. My first attempt to speak up. Buried. Ignored. Then erased. I looked up. "You pulled this." Leona shrugged. Some of us kept receipts even before it was trendy. We shared a long look.
Not allies, not yet.
But not strangers either. That evening, as I packed up, Cashin passed by my office. "Walk with me?" he asked. We stepped into the twilight-drenched corridor that led to the rooftop garden. The air was cooler than usual. I looked away from things I shouldn't have. But I never erased anyone. That was her play. I nodded, absorbing the weight of what he wasn't saying. "You're not here to be a token redemption story. Alyssa, you know that, right?" "I'm not here for redemption," I said. "I'm here to rebuild." Cashin smiled faintly. "Then let's make sure the foundation holds." When I returned to my office, took them long enough to listen. We clinked paper cups in quiet defiance. That afternoon, I received a formal notice. I'd been appointed to co-chair the Internal Ethics Redevelopment Board. Effective immediately. Not a seat at the table. A chance to redesign the room. And maybe, just maybe, ensure that no one else ever had to scream just to be heard. By the end of the month, the changes became visible, subtle, but present. The whispers that once trailed behind me in hallways had turned into nods of acknowledgement. Invitations to speak, panels to join, requests for input on policy drafts, all small acknowledgements, but they carried weight. The Ethics Redevelopment Board held its first session in a repurposed lounge on the top floor, overlooking the skyline. It wasn't just symbolic, it was strategic. Sunlight streamed through glass walls as if to say, "We see now. We won't look away." I sat across from compliance leads, executive officers, and new voices from departments previously excluded from decision-making. Jules sat beside me, not as a junior anything, but as my equal. We opened the meeting with a single prompt. What does accountability look like when no one's watching? Silence at first. Then a voice from IT. It looks like paper trails no one expects to be read. Another from finance. Like saying something even when it's inconvenient. We weren't there to punish. We were there to construct. Our task was to ensure the cracks didn't widen again. And then, the inevitable, Vivian returned. Not to her former position, but to challenge the shifts happening without her. At a town hall forum meant to gather cross-departmental feedback, she stood up and asked, with her usual polish, "Are we confusing redemption with competency? Some ideas weren't implemented before for a reason." I took the mic slowly. And some weren't implemented because the wrong people were protecting the wrong legacy. Gasps weren't audible, but the stillness was. Vivian's eyes narrowed slightly, but she smiled. "Just remember, Alyssa, glass ceilings aren't the only thing that shatter under pressure." I met her gaze. Let's just hope they break upward. The room didn't applaud. It didn't need to. It listened. Afterward, Cashin approached. "She's trying to scare you. She should know by now," I replied. "Fear doesn't make me smaller. It just sharpens my vision." Back at my desk, I received an anonymous package. Inside, a photograph. It was from a family gathering years ago, the same one where I'd been cropped out in the framed version hung in our hallway. But this print was the unedited original. I was there. Off-center, blinking but present. There was no note, just a post-it stuck to the back. Proof is power. My chest tightened, not with sadness, but with clarity. Someone had kept the truth, quietly. Someone had remembered. That night, I pinned a photo inside the cabinet door above my desk. Not for display, but as reminder, erasure doesn't always work. Eventually, what's real finds its way through the cracks. Later that week, during an informal mixer, I found myself cornered by a junior engineer named Mila. She looked nervous. "I just wanted to say," she began, "I've been following your talks. I used to think I didn't belong here. That my input wasn't valid because I didn't come from whatever Ivy path everyone else did." I smiled. Validation isn't earned from pedigree. It's built in repetition. Keep showing up. Keep saying the thing, even if your voice shakes. Mila nodded, her eyes wet. "Thanks." The board's progress picked up. Drafts became documents. Proposals turned to pilots. The structure began to settle. But inside, I knew. Legacy isn't built in meetings. The Western Ethics Forum was held at a converted cathedral downtown. High ceilings, Gothic arches, stained glass refracting light across rows of polished chairs. The grandeur felt ironic, considering we were there to talk about humility, truth, and power. Cashin and I didn't walk in together. He understood the importance of me entering on my own. As I moved through the nave, I noticed familiar faces, policy writers, former skeptics, interns now leading projects, even Mila in the back row with a notebook. The moderator introduced me plainly.
No embellishments.
Our next speaker is Alyssa Mirza. Her work in digital ethics has reshaped compliance structures across multiple sectors. I stepped up, microphone in hand, not shaking. I used to think being seen was the goal, I began. But it's not. Being seen is just the beginning. What you do once they notice, that's what defines you. The first slide behind me appeared. A reprint of my original ethics module diagram. No fancy formatting. Just lines and logic. Raw and unfiltered. I told the story of its origin, not from the summit stage but from my tiny desk, the nights I spent editing it while my family thought I was wasting my time. I spoke of plagiarism and silence, of being cropped from pictures and ignored in meetings. I didn't name names. I named systems. The room didn't stir until the second slide. It wasn't data. It was that old family photo, the unedited one. I paused. Sometimes what gets removed says more than what remains. I ended with a question I'd asked myself many times. What if we built institutions that didn't reward erasure, but recognized endurance? The applause came gradually, quiet at first, then steady,
Then lasting.
not a standing ovation. Something more respectful, enduring. After the forum, while others networked and gathered around panelists, I stepped outside. The chill in the air was bracing. It reminded me I was still alive, still building. That evening, back at the office, I returned to my small corner workspace.
Nona me plate. No plaqué.
Just my photo inside the cabinet and a folded note taped to the desk. You're not just in the picture now. You're holding the camera.
No signature.
I didn't need one. A week later, Cashin quietly announced his resignation. No scandal, just the recognition that it was time to step aside. His final words to the board: the future shouldn't need our protection. It should stand without it. By spring, I was named lead architect for the new Strategic Accountability Division. Vivian submitted her exit papers shortly after. The timing wasn't a coincidence. Leona became head of policy inclusion. Jules joined a startup focused on AI transparency and ethics. Mila asked me to write her recommendation letter for grad school. And my sister? Vivian didn't reach out again. But one afternoon, I received a forwarded email, an article she'd written anonymously for a leadership blog. It spoke of power, regret, and the danger of mistaking visibility for virtue. She was trying, quietly. That mattered more than I expected. My final thought as I left the office one Friday wasn't about who I'd proven wrong, but about who I had become right for. I passed the frame in the hallway. The new team photo. Centered, clear. No one cropped. I paused, then smiled. Legacy isn't about being remembered. It's about making sure no one else gets erased.